We hear people in social media comments all the time say, well, there's no rules on the street. Yeah, there are. There are rules, and they're called laws. And if you break those rules, you can end up in prison for a long time. And
It's
the variables, the variables are endless, unpredictable, and unrepeatable. There are no two violent encounters that are the same. And so that's why we want to stay away from pre-choreographed prescribed training, because we have to be principle based so that we're adaptable with how we're dealing with whatever we're faced with. How are things, man? How's
Very
the
good,
golf
man.
game? How's the golf game?
Funny you say that, man. I messed up my back like 2 weeks ago, obviously playing too much golf and fighting too hard, right? One day I'll learn to find this balance, man. It's been interesting, but I wasn't bad. Shot the best round of my life 3 weeks ago, and I went and played on Monday and shot the worst round of the year. So, loving it, loving it.
That's golf. You know what I say?
Yeah.
Any amount of golf is too much golf. That's what I say.
Yeah, you don't play
I,
at all,
I,
or
I used to. I grew up since I was 2 years old playing golf. We lived on a golf course.
oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
And my dad cut off clubs when I was 3 years old, and I was on par 3 courses, and it's like a religion in my family.
Oh, wow. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, but I just don't. I don't play anymore. I think it's cool. I think it's cool that you do it. I like the long drive stuff. I think that's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Do your fans know that you do that? That you're a competitive long drive guy?
No, no,
Long
no. We were
that you
gonna make like a channel for it and follow me along through my journey and things like that. But like to be perfectly honest, I don't want to shut down long drive, but my ball speed, my max was like 202 miles an hour. I entered in the 40 plus division. I won the Alberta kind of two that they had here. And then basically, long story short, I chose not to continue to compete or try to go to a national level anymore because these young guys now, like Kyle Berkshire is like 238 mile per hour ball speed. And I hit
Whoa.
like 246 and stuff. And it's like, if I
Whoa.
do that, I literally would have to stop martial arts training completely,
Yeah.
start a strength training program for it, be
Yeah.
hitting balls, and like my spine is saying, don't do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's been nice. So like it reignited my love for the sport. I took 10 years off once I got out of the military. It was too hard on the back. And now my back's doing a little bit better. I was like, okay, let's reintroduce it. But I have to reintroduce it with little pieces as time goes on. So
If we ever go golfing, here's how it's going to be.
yeah.
Todd's going to be on the golf cart with a
Yeah.
cigar, chilling out,
Yeah, yeah,
while Kevin is doing what golf people do.
that sounds like what my girlfriend wants to do too. She's like, "Can I just come and read a book?"
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
like, "Well, you
Seriously.
can, but you have to pay for half the cart." She's like, "That's ridiculous. I don't want to do that." So, but yeah, we'll make it work. I'll write it off for the business, and then we can just chat. We'll do a podcast on the course. There you go.
Whoa. Wouldn't that be
Oh.
cool?
Sweet man. So yeah, today I wanted to chat about kind of the legalities of everything, and you call it, sorry, the four pillars.
Governing the legalities around the use of force. Yeah.
Love, love it.
There's four distinct pillars, and they're fairly universal. It's jurisdictional too, depending on where you're at with some of them.
Yeah.
But either way, I'll talk about this, but on the civil side of the legalities, not just the criminal side,
Yeah.
they're all going to be a factor.
Mm.
Uh, uh, yeah. So with my background as a certified force science analyst,
Yeah.
and some of my friends are some of the top legal minds and violent crime investigators um, in the United States. So this is something that I spend a lot of time on studying and even more importantly, training.
Mm.
Right, training people to have this be what we call the rules to the game.
Mm.
Right. So we hear people in social media comments all the time say, well, there's no rules on the street. Yeah, there are. There are rules, and they're called laws. And
Yeah.
if you break those rules, you can end up in prison for a long time. And oftentimes now in the United States, even if you don't break those rules, it's a really interesting dynamic that we're in. So it's going to be really important for those that are watching. If you're really serious about understanding self-defense and training self-defense, this is a really big deal.
For sure. And I mean, to go back to that comment section, like the comment section, the best, I absolutely love it is, I'd rather be tried by 12 than
Yeah,
captured
yeah,
by 6. And I'm like,
yeah,
you have to make your own rules of engagement, right? And for those people that don't know
yeah,
what it means, right, is rules of engagement is a military term or law enforcement term where it's there are rules you need to follow it before you engage the enemy, right? And I have rules of engagement for myself in self-defense, but I have it if I'm by myself. I have different rules of engagement if I'm with my son. I have different rules of engagement if I'm with my mom, who's
yeah,
right now in a walker. I have
yeah.
different rules if I'm with my family. So when we were saying rules of engagement or ROEs, that's what we're talking about. But I think for the viewers, one of the big things that I've noticed over the past couple of years is how there's a big gap from martial arts to self-defense because they're like, well, I'm going to do this in martial arts. I'm going to break his arm and I'm going to pull out my knife and I'm going to stab him and I'm going to get away with it. And it's like, no, you're not. Like legally, you were giving very bad advice. And I think it's important that we actually understand the four pillars really, really well so that we're giving our students and giving people that are watching a better idea and understanding of what self-defense actually means and legally what you're allowed to do.
Yeah, and something there's my mind goes a million places, but something I want to say is this is going to be a thumbnail overview. I'm not kidding you. If we did an episode every single day for the
Oh, yeah.
next 3 years, we wouldn't be able to cover it all. I mean it. I mean it. Like it is that detailed and it is that in depth. We don't need to go that deep. In fact, it's better right now that we keep it simple.
Yeah,
Okay. But simple doesn't mean easy when it comes to
for sure.
how we're applying these rules. And you bring up a really great point, and that's your own personal morality.
Mm.
We're not here to impose our morality onto yours. That's going to be completely up to you. But the moral and ethical side of it and the legal side of it aren't always the same. One thing that I want to point out, a couple of things I want to point out just to kind of preface this and prime it a little bit is to keep it simple for now, I will primarily be talking about lethal force. However, I'll be touching on on um, other levels of force. Okay, we'll be talking about that, and that's tricky.
It
That's
is.
really tricky. It's tricky to understand that. So we're not here to impose at all, but in terms of what you feel like you should do. But the other part is for me, when it comes to lethal force, what I talk about
Yeah.
is for me personally, I have to make a decision now ahead of time. I need to premeditate what those decisions are going to be. And then I'm going to be asking myself the question in that fraction of a second, literally fractions of a second.
Yeah.
Um, am I willing to lose everything
Yeah.
to use lethal force? That's the main thing. Am I willing to go to prison? Am
Yeah.
I willing to have my property and my assets taken from me? Am I willing to lose my life?
Mm.
And I don't think that the world out there, especially the social media world, really understands the stakes of carrying a lethal weapon and using self-defense. For the audience that's not familiar, like I specialize in use of force and integrating combatives and self-defense with a handgun, with a firearm, and
Mm.
other firearms too. And so this is absolutely pivotal. Literally day one, first 20 minutes. We aren't just with my students. We aren't just talking about what these pillars are. We aren't just verbalizing it. They're literally training to make these decisions at the same time that they're learning their kinetic skills.
Yeah,
These
that
things
was
as
a really cool
they
thing.
have to go they have to go together. Yeah, you experience that.
It was
Yeah.
it was it was mind blowing for sure. Like I've done something similar. I teach in a similar way, but you could really see your level of expertise of how much you've mentally thought about it, not just as an instructor, but also as a student and as a civilian, because I think that's probably the biggest thing that a lot of people don't do, right, is the amount of mental training that they can be doing to prepare themselves for a situation doesn't actually require physical training, right? And I think it's nice when you can integrate both of them, right? But one thing I've been talking about lately on a couple other podcasts is like there's so many things going on in people's lives right now that they don't want to physically train, to be honest, right? And they'd rather watch a short video, right? And say, hey, I think I'll remember that and I'll be able to do that. And I think that's why, again, you and I wanted to be able to get these podcasts together of like, okay, maybe you guys won't physically train, but here, let's have some conversations about this. And then on those days that you do decide to physically train, let's integrate some of those things that we've learned from, say, today's podcast. So
Yeah, not physically training and not integrating your decision making, legal decision making, tactical decision making with your training all together is a big mistake.
I agree. 100%.
Big mistake. So if you're one of these people, we're not blaming and shaming you. We're just saying, man, find a partner.
Yeah.
You know, I'm serious. Like, find a partner, find a school that, which is rare, right? Most schools don't integrate these things together, which is a shame. And you can't do this once or twice a year. Trust me, this has to be something that's happening on an ongoing basis.
Yeah.
Um,
Right on.
should we just jump into number one?
Let's get right into it.
The first pillar goes like this: you must reasonably be in immediate fear of death or great or grievous bodily harm. That's the first one. So let's break that down. You must reasonably, immediately be right in immediate fear of death or great or grievous bodily harm.
Okay.
So what that means is that threat has to be the threat of death or great bodily harm, meaning that bodily member or organ or injury you'll never fully recover, or there's a high probability that you're going to die. And that threat is happening now, immediately. They're in immediate proximity to you. And then you have to ask yourself the question, well, what's immediate proximity? Let's talk about an obvious example where it's obviously not immediate. Someone's 3 stories up on an apartment building balcony and they have a knife and they're threatening to kill you. That threat isn't immediate,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's a great
But
example.
if they have a firearm, it is.
Would
You
it
see?
depend
So
on what kind of firearm they have at that
no,
point? No? Okay.
no,
Okay.
no. If they have a firearm, it is. That's immediate.
Okay.
And by the way, if they have a replica,
Yeah.
you're not obligated. You don't need to know if it's a replica or if it's a real weapon,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? How can you discern that? And there are other ambiguities. Are their hands behind their back, and are their hands not visible? And you don't know. Well, like if they're threatening you with they say they're 3 balconies up.
Yeah.
They say, I have a gun and I'm going to shoot you right now. You're dead now. And they have their hands behind their back. You're not obligated to know whether they really do or not.
Yeah, for sure.
This is where it gets really tricky, and where you really need to learn how to handle these things, because it's not obvious. A lot of these things are not intuitive. So the threat has to be immediate.
Okay.
Also, like, what is immediate? Some people, though, you'd be shocked. We'll get into future episodes about how long things take at what distances and
Mm.
whatnot. But even if they're 21 to 25 feet away, they're immediate. Like, you don't have to wait for the threat to be on top of you before you use force in return.
Yeah.
So it's really your decision making really needs to be circumstantial, and you get good at that the more that you practice making those decisions.
Yeah. That
So
was one of the hardest things that my buddies said when they were in Afghanistan, right? Is it's somebody's rolling up on them, they're riding a bicycle, it could be a bicycle
yeah,
IED, right? And they're
yeah,
rolling up and they have to make that decision. But we were never trained to make that decision. There was
yeah.
no courses like you offer. There was nothing that was offered to the military to be able to process that information quick. And it got a lot of people actually blown up because they'd be like, stop, stop, stop. And they're not willing to shoot. They're not willing to take the shot, right? Because the Taliban would usually use like a 12-year-old kid who's strapped to a bicycle bomb, and then the bicycle would get close enough, and then they, detonate it and go from there. But there'd be other
Yeah.
times there's just a kid on a bike who doesn't speak English,
Yeah.
right?
And
So
that level of ambiguity can be very similar for citizen defenders out on the street,
yeah,
where
totally.
the intent is hidden until the last possible moment, and it's an ambush. And the big decision making, and this is again where we get into distance management and how long things take and all the factors that are involved with that.
Yeah,
But it can be really tricky, because we can overreact and we can use too much force at the wrong time, and now you're going to prison. And you
yeah,
can underreact and you can wait too long, and now you're dead or seriously injured, and you're 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 eating through a straw for the rest of your life, and you're a burden to your family. And
yeah.
you know, so this is why just touching on, right, not even going deep at all, just touching on
Mm-hmm.
the complexities around this decision making. You have to be able to make these decisions right now. That's
Yeah.
why it's so important that you're training and practicing these decisions all the time. Okay, so that's the first one. You
Yeah.
must reasonably be in immediate fear of death or great bodily harm.
Can you
And
just
so who gets to decide reasonable, right? That's where it's subjective.
Well, and that's it. I was just going to ask, like, isn't that subjective then? So isn't that going to be up to the judge or up to the lawyer to paint the picture well in court if it was
The
lethal, right?
the
To be
the prosecutor,
yeah,
the jury, like, and these people they're not formally trained in the use of force. They're
yeah,
not.
yeah,
They know what the laws say, what the
yeah,
letter of the laws say, but oftentimes they have a bias.
yeah,
They're a prosecutor who wants a career and they want to get a win, and they'll find anything that they can do and say against you.
yeah,
They're not there to be dispassionate about the law and pursue the truth.
yeah.
And this is where it gets really tricky for citizen defenders. We have to understand I teach people, think like a prosecutor thinks. Let's talk about how most prosecutors are going to think.
Nice. Yeah.
Uh, and so that's a different lens through which you're seeing violence.
Well, and I
Very
think
different
it's
lens.
important that when you're creating your own rules of engagement or following rules of engagement, that you are stepping outside of what would you do and what would that prosecutor say to get me in trouble here? What kind of story can they paint a picture of to make it look like I was actually the person who was in wrong when the criminal was the one who was actually in the wrong?
They'll make the most innocent, justified person look like a bloodthirsty killer.
Yeah.
They will frame you in a way that is an absolute mischaracterization. I don't know how they live. I don't know how they sleep at night.
Yeah.
Honest to God, I don't know how someone can be that soulless.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's absolutely baffling to me.
Yeah.
I can wrap my hand around it because I've studied it so intensely,
Yeah.
but it's probably not what you think. Let's put it that way. So we need to have good legal training. And I want to say this: there's a lot of very popular social media personalities out there that you think are highly respected and know what they're talking about, know what they do, and know what they're selling, that are setting you up for serious legal implications. I could name names and I could give you thousands of video examples. Okay. And you think it's framed so well and it's so well articulated and at least seems so legitimate.
Yeah.
And if you knew what we knew, it's really infuriating. It's frustrating. And one, they're because they're super popular, and then that mis and disinformation is getting out there. But two, I know how they're setting people up for bad things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's that's the tough part, right? So do you feel like there's anything that can help like prepare people? So I'll just give you an example of what I try and do or what I tell my family, right? Is if I'm with my family and I believe there's something about to go down, they know, or my girlfriend knows, to grab the kids, run back to the car, get in the vehicle, and immediately start filming. Because yes, there's CCTV cameras, there's this and there that, but the prosecutor will use the footage that they want to see. Where if I have basically documentation of something taking place the whole time, that would be best. So when involved in an altercation, would you recommend like pulling out your phone and start videoing it so there is something, or like what, how
Yeah.
can you make it less subjective?
This should actually be its own episode sometime,
Yeah.
but no, really,
Awesome.
really.
Yeah,
But I'll touch on it from a very from a forced science point of view, a
please do.
very forced scientific point of view. And I do have a background as a filmmaker and a documentary filmmaker, and I know how video. You hear like video doesn't lie. Yeah, it does.
Yeah, for
It
sure.
does. There's a lot of context that you don't see. You're seeing in the video in hindsight what's not through the eyes of whoever's shooting the video or whoever the victim is, right? Or right. What they're seeing and what you're seeing on video is not the same thing
Mhm.
in terms of how the brain processes information and the perceptual changes that happen under stress. What's the contrast of the video? What happened before the fact leading up to that event? What angles aren't you seeing?
Yeah,
There are a lot of factors, and so we can't cherry pick.
yeah,
So even if you shoot your own video, that can be misleading in a way that works against you, because the things that you're saying and doing in there
yeah,
can most definitely be taken out of context. And now a prosecutor's saying, look, they shot this video themselves, this is they own this footage, and this proves that they're guilty for these reasons.
wow,
So it can work for you and it can work against you. It's sort of like body cam footage
yeah,
of that police officers have. That can be an advantage for the truth, and it can also be a disadvantage for the truth. So I can give you examples of, I could show you footage and you're like, well, that's a slam dunk case. That's absolutely, I know exactly what happens here. I'm like, okay, let's look at the other 24 cameras
yeah,
and let's look at happened. Let's look at the video footage that was captured with a wide angle lens 10 minutes before the incident took place and what the buildup was. And that will tie into where we're going next with these four pillars. So I hope the audience is starting to see just how what this really, a taste of what this really is, and not what their preconceived ideas are about what it is.
yeah. Well,
Makes
it
sense?
should be mind opening. I mean, a lot of people probably never even thought about it, right? So it's nice for them to be able to have something. So
Yeah, and that's just the first pillar,
yeah,
right?
right, right. And it's like, and like you said, is that alone, this could be a whole episode and we can go into way more detail, but we just want
Oh,
to, like you said, want to give a thumbnail kind of idea.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's really, and this is something that I obsess about. You know,
Really? I couldn't tell. But I love it,
um,
right? And that's where I see your passion. Like when you're teaching this stuff, when we were doing those exercises in a couple scenarios, oh man, I'm so glad I have, like, I filmed everybody that was in the instructor course and I rewatched those moments so much because I'm just like, holy cow, like this could have gone this way, this could have gone this way, but it also could have gone this way, and this could have done this. And it's like, it's
the variables the variables are endless, unpredictable, and unrepeatable. There are no two violent encounters that are the same.
yeah,
And so that's why we want to stay away from pre-choreographed prescribed training,
exactly.
because we have to be principle based so that we're adaptable with how we're dealing with whatever we're faced with.
Whoa, boom! The self-defense industry is broken, wouldn't you agree? Have you gone from martial art to martial art looking for the responses that you need to have for a self-defense situation? Well, I spent 35 years training in martial arts. I acquired 7 different black belts to find out that when I pressure tested their shit, it didn't work. So what did I do? I had to come up with my own system. Make sure to check it out at budobrothers.com. Build the confidence you need to stay safe.
Beautifully said.
The second one, pillar number 2.
Yeah.
Pillar number 2 says you must within reason be an unwilling participant in the conflict. And this is where a lot of people get in trouble.
Oh yeah.
Why they go to jail? Because they escalated it. They were willingly there. They stepped outside. It was a road rage situation, and they both got out of the car, and they were both talking shit to each other, and egos got in play. They were a willing participant. They wanted the fight to happen,
Yeah.
or they were willing to have that fight, as opposed to being imposed onto them
Yeah.
against their will. right? What that doesn't mean, by the way, all four of these pillars have to be in place for you to come to the defense of another person.
Mm,
If
wow.
one of these laws is not in place and you're defending somebody else, you're the one who's in trouble.
See, and
So if
that's
you're
why a lot of people probably don't even want to get involved in the States, right? Like in
so
Canada, when I've
if
seen
you're
fights take place, I just jump in and like try and separate them. But in the
if your
States, like,
if your friend or your girlfriend was talking shit,
mhm,
did you like how I did that? It's like I did that.
it was nice. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
an improvement for me. That's an
We're
improvement for me.
we're trying not to swear for you guys. We don't want to get in trouble by YouTube.
Um, so
Fair
someone
enough.
that you love or care about was the person who was escalating.
Yeah, yeah,
And now a conflict happens, a physical conflict, and you intervene
yeah,
and you use physical force and that person wasn't justified.
yeah,
You could be the person who's in trouble,
yeah.
right?
Oh
So it's
yeah, no,
important that,
it's I think it's a huge.
yeah,
I'm gonna jump in with a quick story here.
yeah, yeah.
So um I have a rule in my dojo that if any of my students fight, not defend themselves, fight, they're kicked out immediately. Right.
Same,
So
same here. Yeah.
one of my older students, he's in my adult program. Sorry, not older, he's in my adult program. He's probably 18, 19 now, right? And he's out for dinner. And I don't see him for 2 weeks. And he usually trains 3 days a week religiously. I don't see him for a couple weeks. I'm like, what's going on? Did something happen? And his older brother's there, right? And his older brother's been in a couple tilts and stuff, but it's always him not instigating it. He finishes it, but he's definitely, I've deemed it as self-defense. So I'm like, tell me what's going on. I'll try not to use his name, right? Tell me what's going on. Right. So he shows up to class. He's in class. Notice he's got a little bit of a shiner. Right. And I'm like, once class is done, I'm like, okay, buddy, we all have to come together. So I brought the class together. We always like have a little powwow after, anyways. I was like, tell the story. And you better tell it because right now I am your judge and this is your jury. And we will decide if you get to continue training here or not. And they're out for dinner. It's him and his girlfriend. And there's these two guys who are in a booth and they're super obnoxiously drunk and they're making fun of the server, and his girlfriend's a server, I believe. So she stands up for the server and she goes and walks over to the table. She walks over to the table. The two guys get up. He gets up and he follows suit. So he's like 6 feet behind. And it all happens so fast. Guy gets up and socks his girlfriend in the face, puts her down to the floor. He gets involved right away, slips, smashes, ducks, smashes other guy, eats a shot in the process. Those guys are down. He's up and he's free. And I was like, I like that you didn't hit first because legally I think you might be okay, but it's going to be tough, right? So this is one that always comes up because it's like, was he justified in doing that? Right? Was he okay? And without getting too much into it, we broke down the whole fighting aspect, the martial arts aspect of everything, and talked about it and say, hey, cool, we do that in this drill, and we did this the other night here. Like, that's awesome, right? And then at the end, I was like, what's the lesson? Right? And there's an older guy in the class, and he's like, should have kept your girlfriend at the table.
Yep.
Right? She didn't need to go up. She didn't need to go and defend the server.
She escalated.
She escalated. Yep.
Or if they're in the car with you and they're the one flipping the bird, right? And
Yep.
That's a really great point. A couple things I'd like to point out here. Just to jump off on that, to
Mhm.
add on what you're saying. By law, you don't have to go second.
Yeah.
You can, right? If the threat is immediate and they're showing pre-attack indicators,
Yeah.
pre-incident indicators, things like that, you don't have to wait for them to go first. You can strike preemptively,
Yeah.
but you have to be able to articulate your justification for going first.
Yeah.
So we have the whole thing, I don't know if it was like here, we're in Canada, but here in the United States, the sort of the playground rule was, who threw the first punch? And that's what how the teachers and the principals of the school would say, like, okay, who threw the first punch? I'm like, you didn't know anything about
Yeah.
self-defense. Yeah, just shut up. Just
Yeah.
shut up. And it's a big problem in the world
Yes.
that the world has been educated by the media and all these myths and misconceptions about what self-defense is and how it works, what the rules are legally and all it's really, really, really bad.
It is.
The other part is in terms of being an unwilling participant is if somebody else is justified and you intervene to protect innocent people, you're not a willing participant. You didn't want to have to do that. You didn't, right? If there's an active shooter and you decide I'm going to go stop that active shooter
Yeah.
because all these people and myself are an immediate threat because I'm in a common structure with a person with a firearm who's killing people or an edge weapon or whatever, you're not a willing participant.
Mm.
You chose to intervene to protect other people. And it was clear and obvious that all of these people here, that all of the four of these pillars that we're going to talk about today are in place.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to tell you that you should or should not intervene there. That's a personal choice. But
Yeah.
I just want to talk about what this doesn't mean. That this doesn't mean that you're a willing participant if you defend somebody else, if all of these criteria are met.
Yeah. Well, and it's a tough one, right? Because I think we talked about it previously, and it was like, you could say anything to me now, and I would not engage with you at all.
No,
Right?
no.
Unless it was like a life threat. Like that's kind of the only time where I'm like, okay, now I'm perked. Now I'm feeling adrenaline. Now I really have to assess the situation. But you could say anything to my family. You could say anything to my girlfriend. Because like as a young kid at 20, that would be my trigger. My trigger was if you use the F word to me, it was on. Right? That was it. It was the second that the F dropped, boom, jab in the face, right? But
fanboy, fanboy, was that the word?
yeah, fanboy, totally. Right. So it was always really interesting for me, right? Because it was now I'm at a point where it's like, okay, if I'm really in control of my ego, these people could say anything to me. And yes, it might bother me inside. And yes, I won't like it. And yes, I'll talk to my psychologist about it. And I'll talk to the kids about it on the drive home. And we'll talk about it on dinner. And Daddy, why didn't you do something? He said this. And I'll lead by example, right? Because we're the ones that are in control of it. If somebody is triggering you, you have psychological issues you haven't dealt with. And you have to go and put time and work and effort into that. And that's where the ego comes in. And it's pretty cool, right? Where we can really see, yes, we're talking about legalities right now, but how much it really ties into us as human beings and our own life philosophies. Like it's
all about self-regulation.
Exactly.
All of it. It's all about self-regulation. Life is about self-regulation. And this is a perfect example. A couple other things I'll touch on here. There's a difference between a fight and an attack.
Nice.
The fight is mutual, right? The fight is a duel. An attack is asymmetrical. It's someone who's ambushing you or imposing upon you without without your consent.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. Also, conflict avoidance is huge. I think that's what you're talking about here. Having the skills to understand conflict avoidance.
Yeah.
And then there's de-escalation and deterrence.
Yeah.
I'll talk a little bit. We should do a whole episode just on de-escalation and deterrence.
Absolutely love
it. But there's a lot of misconceptions about what that means too.
Yeah.
I'll just touch on it briefly because I know we want to get through all four of these, right? But de-escalation means that you're talking somebody down, right? And you through your behavior, through your manner, and through your words, you're taking the level of escalation and you're bringing it down. Something I want to talk about though, when most violence and violent crimes are happening from psychopaths and sociopaths who don't have empathy. And they only understand two things. They understand strength and weakness. That's it. Trust me. My background psychology. That's all they understand, strength and weakness. So if you're attempting to de-escalate with a psychopath who's already made up their mind they're going to use violence to against your will, they've already made up their mind.
Yeah.
Your attempt to de-escalate is only going to attract more violence.
Yeah. Interesting.
Okay, so that's where it gets into the difference between de-escalation works best if there's a conflict. A fender bender, you spilled somebody's beer, their girlfriend's looking at you, right? You can de-escalate that. Sometimes you can de-escalate that.
Yeah.
But deterrence is becoming a very unattractive a target to whoever the would-be aggressor is.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're letting them know you're about to bite into something that you can't chew. Yeah. So now that's what deterrence is. You're becoming an unattractive, hard target.
Yeah.
So those are big deal, and most people don't know what the difference is between those things or what the strategies are for handling those things.
Nice. Yeah,
really the best conflict avoidance is just to not be there where bad stuff's happening in the first place. Just avoid those situations altogether.
Yeah.
Here's a quick story for you.
Please.
A buddy of mine, where our wives had the same musical group that they like. It's their favorite group. So we were going to surprise them with tickets to concert.
Really?
And we were there early.
Okay.
And we were standing in line early, right? And we're both, well trained. We're not small guys, and we're both carrying firearms to buy tickets while we're waiting in line for a long time.
Yeah.
And these two dudes walk up, they're going down the line. And you have to understand, like, being a big guy who's an alpha also attracts aggression, because now it's alpha versus alpha, right? So they come up to us and they're like, this is our spot now. Because the line was so long, right? This is our spot now. You can go. So I said, okay. And I walked away.
Yeah.
You can have it.
Yeah.
Then my buddy was like, what? We could have lit those guys up. What are you doing, you coward? I'm like, it's worth it, isn't it? It's worth it for us to beat people down, risk getting injured seriously, risk injuring them seriously or others around us and going to jail for what would I say?
No, it's okay. The audio started cutting out.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So it's okay. When you went loud and
louder, it started to blow out.
It went really, really quiet. So
okay.
So you were saying he started calling you a coward.
Yeah, he started calling me a coward. Like, what's going on? Why are you doing this? We could have lit those guys up. What's going on? I'm like, is it worth it?
Yeah.
Is it worth it for us to harm somebody else or be harmed or risk going to jail and have this escalation happen for tickets to a concert?
Or kill someone?
Well, yeah, of course.
Right?
And
because let's just say worst case scenario, they get into it. It's a pushing match, whatever. They're probably strapped. You're probably strapped, right? All of a sudden they recognize that, and then they go for your gun, right?
Too many unknown variables.
Like you said, just for tickets, right? But that's what people do, right?
And then he was like, we got in the cars. Okay, I get it. You're right. And of course, we didn't even get the tickets because the line was so long. It was, and it just wasn't worth it. It just wasn't worth it. And the more that you train and understand violence, the less you want it.
Well, for sure. And it's even with as much training as you and I have, and especially being big, tall men, right? We attract that energy. We also deter it, right? Like there's definitely people who walk in the other direction when they see me come up.
Yeah.
But I have resting bitch face on, right? Like I love those memes that are happening lately where it's like the girlfriend's filming their husband like in the mall, and it's like he's all like proper and like walking around, and then he's like, hey, what's up, babe? Right? Because that's it. Like my girlfriend's like, you're just a big teddy bear, aren't you? And I was like, well, I am when I'm safe. When we're in our house and we're amongst friends and loved ones, like I can be me. I can be light. I can be happy. I feel great. But when I'm out, I'm a protector, right? Because that's who I am.
Yeah.
Right. And
I call it the 10,000 mile stare.
Nice.
And there's nothing more intimidating than the 10,000 mile stare when you just don't respond, when
Yeah.
you're just looking right through their soul
Yeah. Yeah. Nice.
and you are completely unfazed by whatever they got going on.
Yeah.
That's terrifying to them,
Oh, for sure.
right?
Especially if there's a
And
bully
the
in there.
and the and there's another part of this that I didn't mention. We should have another show on what's called the 5 stages of violent crime. Our job is to disengage unless we have no choice. We're disengaging. We're not engaging unless we have no choice but to engage.
So
There's so
going
much. There's
back to
so
the
much.
first, going back to the first pillar, then immediate threat. Sorry, what did you just say? You just said unless you have to engage.
Yeah, yeah. If you have no other choice but to engage the threat. Yeah.
So when
If
would
so,
you engage the threat then?
someone grabs my wife and tries to take her to a secondary location and force her into human trafficking situation,
Yeah.
you're not leaving me any choice. By the way, that's a form of lethal so is forcible rape,
Yeah.
right? That's a form of lethal, that's a lethal threat.
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't lethal, even if it was less than lethal,
Yeah.
you know, if it was bodily harm or substantial bodily harm or whatever level of threat is, it doesn't mean that I can't engage. It means that you're leaving me no choice. But
Mm.
I have to engage, right? I've got children in a car in front of me who are giving me a hand signal that they're in trouble.
Yeah.
And I follow, and I yeah, and I follow them.
Yeah.
Well, that child's not leaving me a choice. But for
Nice.
me, for my morality, they're not leaving me a choice. There's no way I'm going to let that child just go.
Yep.
But that's my personal choice. I'm not saying that should be yours.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Which is good. So, just real quick, did you know? So I didn't know that if you're driving in Germany on the Autobahn and you throw up your finger to somebody, that it's a 5,000 euro fine. Right? But if you think about it, think about how much that would deter road rage, right? You slap
Yeah.
signs like that, like
Yeah.
crazy,
Yeah.
right? I was
Yeah.
driving. Yeah.
Yeah. That would, but it's also tyranny because you're not letting people express themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a form of speech, right?
For sure.
93% of communication is nonverbal. So this is me as an American and what
Or
my values are. I'm like, no, sorry, like, beep. Like
beep
seriously,
you.
like no. If I want to, if I reserve the right to flip the bird to somebody if I want to, I need to know the consequences are if I do that. If I escalate, I don't want to do that. But you don't get to tell me how I get to communicate with somebody else. I can
Nice.
say whatever I want to say because verbally or non-verbally. Because if you can't speak freely, you're simply not free.
Because of the limitations of live fire and the restrictions of most live fire ranges, we've realized we have to do things differently, and we want to do things differently. We take a principle-based, integrated, and holistic approach to our training that includes pistol craft, weapons-based combatives, as well as soft self-defense skills and education, designed specifically with the citizen defender in mind, in a way that can be done anywhere by anyone. So how do we do that? What does that look like? It's not really something I can explain to you. It's something I have to show you. So stick with us, and together, we'll make the world a safer place.
Nice. Love it. Love it. Okay, sweet. Let's jump into the third.
Yeah, this is a tricky one. And it really is jurisdictional, but in terms of the laws for the criminal laws for self-defense, but this also has civil law implications.
Okay.
And it's you must reasonably have no reasonable. Please allow myself to introduce myself. You must have no reasonable means of retreat.
Yeah.
So
No.
what is reason? So what does
Wow.
reasonable mean? And that's jurisdictional, right? So in some states in the United States, it's called a stand your ground state.
Yes. Okay.
So that means that no matter where you're at, you have the right to be in that place,
Okay.
that you don't have to retreat in a situation like that, that you can stand your ground inside of your home or outside of your home. But in some states, like my state of Minnesota, which we'll talk about more in a second, which is a new law that'll blow your mind, but you have to retreat. If you have a reasonable means of retreat, you are obligated to do so.
Okay.
So what?
Yeah, let's put a scenario to that, just for my
Yeah,
my
let's
simple.
give an example. Well, again, it's going to be subjective. Who gets to decide what's reasonable?
Right.
But in most jurisdictions, here's what this is going to mean. When you're obligated, when you have a legal obligation to retreat, if you can do so safely and reasonably,
Okay.
that means that you don't have to put yourself in a worse situation than the one that you're in.
Okay.
And there's a difference between a possible escape and a reasonable escape. So there's a busy highway right here, right? And this person's threatening me, and I want to get to the other side of the highway, but it's not reasonable for me to go over there because I could get hit by a car. So I'm putting myself in a worse situation. It's possible, but it's not reasonable.
Okay.
There's someone who has a gun in a convenience store waving it around in an armed robbery, saying they're going to kill everybody. And it's possible for me to get out that door before I get shot in the back.
Yeah.
But that's not reasonable. Might be able to go out the cooler in the back room in the back alley, but how do I know that door is not chained shut and I'm putting myself in a worse situation? And how do I know their accomplices in the getaway car aren't waiting back there? So I'm putting myself in a worse situation. So reasonable means of escape and possible means of escape aren't the same thing.
Okay. And sorry, just real quick, are all these pillars fairly transitional between America and Canada in your
Yeah, I just did a couple of seminars in Toronto, and there were law enforcement at the seminar. And I made it a point to address this with them during the seminar to make sure that these pillars were consistent with Canada. And they said yes.
Awesome. Awesome.
So like, no, there's no doubt about it. So yeah. So that's in from from 1,000-foot point of view, a thumbnail like this, that's what this means and what it doesn't mean.
Yeah.
Now, without getting into the weeds too much, very recently, where I live in Minnesota.
Here we go. He's going to get passionate, guys.
The Minnesota Supreme Court recently passed a law that said you cannot present a lethal weapon as a deterrent, which is a whole nother conversation, use weapons as a deterrent, but you cannot even present a lethal weapon as a deterrent if you have a reasonable means of retreat. Now, the case in which inspired this law to be written showed that they have no clue about the use of force and they have no clue about what's reasonable, or worse, that they are acting as a political activist with an agenda. It essentially is an attack on self-defense. The level of how unreasonable this is and how complex it makes the decision making for self-defense with a lethal weapon is utterly and absolutely absurd.
Wow.
We could do 100 episodes on this.
I'm sure we could. Just as a Canadian, guys, it's very interesting for me to learn so much about the state. So one thing when I went to train with Todd was he was very nice and picked me up and drove me around. We got to chat a lot. And one of the things I didn't know about Minnesota and Minneapolis was it's a very liberal state, but it has one of the highest, if not the highest, correct me if I'm wrong, Todd.
The highest.
So it's very liberal state where it doesn't like guns, but it has the most concealed carry permits anywhere. Right. So that blew my mind. The amount of contradiction and hypocrisy alone in that statement. Right. And then to hear something like this, it's terrifying that citizens aren't able to defend themselves because of these political things. And I don't want to go too far down that road myself. Todd can do it all he wants, right? But there's this very, in Canada, we don't have to really worry about it too much. It is becoming something more so now because the amount of attacks that are happening with pistols and guns is crazy. Like I seen my first gun, like I grew up in a not so good part of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And I seen my first gun when I was 8 years old at school, right? My friend took his brother's gun, who was 14 years old, right? It was because, how did they get those guns, guys? They obviously weren't legal guns. And like Calgary's a very, very safe place. But
Yeah.
that's not the first time I've seen a gun, right?
Yeah.
And it was, sorry, it's not the only time I've seen a gun, right? Like I've been driving and there was a guy who cut me off and then I did the wrong. I drove up next to him and I gave him the finger. Sorry, do you guys say gave him the finger in the States?
Well, sometimes, yeah, it's
So
commonly used.
what do you guys like? Flip the bird? Is that a States thing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The only reason I say it is the one video that we did, the road rage video. I'm like, he gave him the finger, and everybody in the comment section like, "You fingered him, bro." No wonder he wanted to shoot you. Don't go
Of
around
course.
fingering people.
Of course. Of course.
So yeah, so just wanted to clear that up for the viewers. The finger, not fingering him, right? So,
Something I want to say about
yeah,
that,
yeah.
just to make sure that there's no misconceptions about in the United States.
Yeah.
When you remove gang warfare
Mm,
and drug warfare, the chances of a crime being committed with a firearm is much less than what's called a personal weapon, where punches and kicks and elbows and headbutts are going too far
yeah,
to the level of excessive force.
yeah.
Edge weapons, blunt force weapons, those are by far the most common level of types of assaults that we have, including here, in Minneapolis.
Mm,
But there's a reason why. I don't know if we can talk about it here, but there's a reason why Minneapolis is so flamingly liberal,
yeah,
but the concealed carry permit ratio is so high.
yeah. I think
So
the viewers know what happened there, and I think we don't need to.
no, it's not that.
Oh, it's not. Oh, interesting.
No,
Okay,
it
yeah.
was well before. It was well before that.
Wow,
There's a
interesting.
reason. There's a reason why, and when we maybe I'll just leave it. I'll just leave that there for now.
Yeah, yeah, sounds good. Sounds good. Hey, viewers, if you guys want it, throw it up in the comments, and maybe we'll do a whole episode on that. So getting back to the third pillar of the unreasonable retreat, right?
You must have a reasonable means of retreat.
Reasonable means of.
If you have a reasonable means of retreat, you must take it.
Okay. Okay. So basically, what it's saying is, if there's a chance for you to exit, so let's say we clashed in a fight,
A reasonable chance.
reasonable chance. Yeah. Okay. So he attacked me first. I use my martial arts training. I defend myself. We get in a little bit of a scruffle. I use my jujitsu skills, take him down to the ground, pin him on the ground, and now there's a chance for me to escape. I have to escape.
If it's reasonable for you to do it. I had a situation where I was cornered by two gangbangers in an alleyway.
Yeah.
And I could have run away, but I determined that there's a good chance I'd be run down or shot in the back if I ran away. So
Yeah.
I decided to hold my ground,
Yeah.
and I used my presence,
Yeah.
and I was carrying, and I used deterrence. I used my presence as a means of self-defense, because I determined in that moment it was possible for me to escape, but it wasn't reasonable.
Okay.
Two gangbangers, right? The disparity in force is high, even if they weren't armed. I knew there was a really good chance they were.
Yeah.
I was armed too.
Yeah.
But my presence deterred them from escalating any further than it did.
Okay.
Okay. Other situation that I had where my truck was surrounded by 5 people trying to arm me.
Yeah.
And from a certain population in Minneapolis that I was alluding to earlier. Okay.
Okay.
They do this, and with this robbery,
You
I
would.
would have been justified to go to a higher force,
Yeah.
but I deterred them with commands, and
Yeah.
I honked my horn over and over again in the car,
Yeah.
and that immediately got them to back off.
And did you
Um,
show your pistol in that?
no, I
No.
did not, because there are
Okay.
5 people around me,
Yeah.
and if I had escalated that, well, now I've got 5 pistols on me. So it's
Mm,
knowing when to use it is more important than if you're justified to use it, actually, and also knowing when and how to use it's more important than how fast you are able to use it.
yes. Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so again, more misconceptions that are out there because of all the garbage on social media. Garbage. Let me say it again. Garbage.
Just so people
Garbage.
don't
Gar
know, right? Or don't know
garbage. Garbage. If
the
you
gun
knew, if
industry.
the audience knew what I knew, they would be saying it with me. Let's all say it together.
I'll say it together.
You think it's cool. You think it's good. You
Yeah.
like it. Wow. Garbage. If you knew, you would be saying it with me. We should write a song, Kevin.
You should.
We should write a
Well,
song.
you can write a song with your donkeys and your guitar, and I'll be the backup singer for you. Just so people don't who maybe don't know Todd. Okay, he runs what's called IDS Training Solutions, or and
In, integrative defense strategies.
okay, yeah, so IDS, sorry. Um,
How
and
about that? How about them apples? How about
there
them
it is.
apples?
Oh, system. Sorry, I missed.
Integrative defense, IDS Apex training system, but it stands for integrative defense strategies. Anyway, go
And
ahead. I'm just busting your
basically,
balls.
all good, all good. We got to get the plug right, right? Todd and I, now I'm an instructor in a system, understand. Todd obviously understands way more how broken the gun industry is. You can watch any of his videos, you will see it. You will see why he does what he does and why now I am also jumping on board with this, because it's broken and it needs to be fixed. And so that's why you guys are seeing Todd's getting so passionate about it, and why he's calling it garbage is because they focus on things that look cool on social media, like look how fast I can pull my pistol out and shoot. But when it comes down to it, they're gun fighters. We're teaching people how to be a fighter with a gun, and there's a massive, massive distinction there. So yeah, so
Not
that's
all
where
that
that
glitter,
passion comes from.
not all that glitters is gold. Let's put it
Yeah,
that way.
exactly, exactly. It's useless stuff. So awesome. Okay, I think that one's pretty self-explanatory, kind of. Right?
In some states or jurisdictions, you're not obligated to retreat. That's not it's a factor of how in the criminal cases you can stay where you're at. You should know that too.
Okay.
But but and I verified this with many lawyers, and those who don't know, I actually consult lawyers, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm an expert witness on use of force cases.
Yeah.
However, how do I want to say this? Just because you're legally justified to defend yourself and you follow the law to a T doesn't mean it isn't going to be a factor if they sue you in a civil case.
Okay. Okay.
So this is why I say I'm going to recommend, if you do have a reasonable means to retreat, if you can take it, if it's
Oh,
reasonable, take it. Take it. You don't want to hurt somebody if you don't have to.
yeah. Yeah. And I
And,
mean,
and
that's, yeah.
and all the jeopardy that you're putting yourself in if you do that, it needs to be a last resort. Any level of force needs to be an absolute last resort.
And I think that's really important to say. And it's not just a disclaimer for us there, guys. It's really this whole idea of, well, I honestly think that's why a lot of people like my videos, right? Because they're like, I love that you emphasize running away. And
Oh
it's like,
yeah,
oh, that is important. You've dealt with the threat. The threat is no longer a threat. Get off the X. Stop being
yeah,
there, because their friends
yeah,
may be rolling up quick. They may,
yeah.
their criminals may be coming. Like, there's so many other things. If your family is safe and you're now safe, get out of there and deal with it later. right?
Get
Like,
to a safe location and get on the phone with 911 immediately. That's
exactly,
another episode, right? Because you don't want them to report the incident differently than the way that it happened.
exactly.
You
So,
know,
and
so
that's where, yeah, having
yeah,
that video, right?
yeah, getting the
Sometimes
in
can
knowing
help.
what the and knowing what the criteria is for what is a safe location.
Nice, nice. Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
that's another conversation.
it is. There's so many more to have, and we will. But let's get to the fourth pillar.
Fourth pillar is called preclusion. That means that within reason, there was no lesser force option that you could have used to stop the threat.
There's no lesser option you
So
could have used to stop the threat.
used to stop the threat. Preclusion within reason. And again, that's going to be subjective based on the bias and the prejudice of the prosecutor, blah, blah, blah. But um, so what does that mean? This person had a knife and they were threatening to kill me and they were within very close proximity to me.
Mhm.
And while I'm very good at defending knife attacks with my hands,
Yeah.
that's not reasonable because I know that the margin for error is small and bad things can happen and they can nick an artery and I can bleed out in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So it wasn't reasonable for me to use these. It was more reasonable for me to use my firearm integrated with these and integrated with other things at distance. That was what was most reasonable for me to stop the threat from harming me or anybody else. But we need to know what's reasonable, what's going to be excessive. Okay.
Mhm.
What does it mean disparity in force? What if you were in a weakened state? Kevin just had spine surgery. He's in a weakened state. Someone smaller and weaker starts to attack him and they don't realize, or he just had open heart surgery. They stomp on his chest too hard, even though they didn't know he had surgery. He knows he could very well die from this attack. So
Yeah.
he decided he needed to go to a force multiplier
Mm.
to employ lethal force before he was killed. There
Yeah.
wasn't a reasonable force option that he could have used to stop it. You
Mm.
see, so that's what preclusion means, and that's what the fourth pillar means. So what it doesn't mean. There's a lot of misconceptions, right? The use of force continuum says you can only use the same level of force that comes against you without going beyond that level of force. So
Yeah.
if they have a knife and you have a knife and a gun, you can't use your gun. You have to use your knife and you have to have a knife fight. No, they have a lethal threat within immediate threat. And not, no, there's a lot of people who believe this. Okay.
Oh, I know. I
Uh,
all
uh,
I'm
uh,
thinking
uh,
of right now is the use of force
this is,
continuum for
they have
police.
a lethal threat. I have a better option to defend them than the knife I have in my pocket. I'm going to use that option.
Yeah.
So that's the fourth pillar, and all four of these pillars need to be in place. You can't, none of them can be missing.
Yeah.
All four pillars have to be in place in order for you to legally use force.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, I mean, it makes sense, right? Because we're not trying to create, like, being a martial artist, as much as we say we love fighting, it doesn't mean we actually want to fight, right? And I think
No,
that's where there's this massive misconception that people that train martial arts like to fight people. And it's no, right? But when we're talking about self-defense, we really have to think. And for me, I integrate, there you go, big guy, right? I integrate my self-defense mindset into my martial arts training. So an example I like to give is if one of my students is in guard, right? So they're on their back and the attacker's below their legs, and they're in closed guard, so your legs are wrapped around them. And they're throwing punches, they sweep, they get to mount, and now my student's ego kicks in and they start just ground and pounding from mount without having a head on a swivel or without switching to knee on belly to exit. I now jump in immediately or have somebody else jump in immediately, and we multiple attacker and we beat them up. Because
yeah,
I'm like, where did you integrate self-defense? Where did you integrate your use of force continuum? Where did you start understanding the legalities of what you've done? You've gotten to a better position. You've showed that now you're in a dominant position, and you've chosen to just rain down punches. Is that point you can get in trouble? So for me, it's I can tell them all this, but in the martial arts class, I just beat the shit out of them, right? And be
Yeah.
like, don't do that again. Look what can happen to you. Because in my experience with students, especially people that are more physical, people that are coming in to train martial arts, they won't listen to me verbally. They will. It just takes longer. But the second that they're eating a whole bunch of punches to the face because
Yeah.
they're doing something wrong, and typically I just tell them, because ego is such a commonly used word now, I'm like, your ego took over, your emotions took over, and you didn't know what to do here. So you chose to just fight when right here you needed to get out. Remember, you were sucker punched down on the ground. They jumped on top of you, and then your training kicked in. Right?
We can't use force punitively. We can't use force to punish somebody.
Yeah.
That's another important factor.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there's a lot. This is where the tactical decision making and the legal decision making and the kinetic skills all come into play. Quick
Yeah.
story about all this.
Yes, please.
I had a student here who trained with me at IDS for a while locally. We call IDS Lab Works, who is a lifelong martial artist, a sensei in judo, third degree black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, very well trained. He's a college professor, impressive guy. And I started talking about the legalities in these combatives, and particularly when was used to integrate the handgun.
Yeah.
And I talked about using the ground as a weapon. I said, okay, so you want to throw them onto the concrete, and now you're using lethal force.
Mm.
Using the ground as a weapon is
Yeah.
that's if someone picks me up off the ground, they're using lethal force or threatening to pick me up off the ground because I know what can happen.
Yeah.
So see how that decision making kicks in. So, and I was going on about it.
Yeah.
He pulled me aside while the class was going on. He couldn't wait.
Yeah. Yeah.
He said, "So are you telling me that if I put hands on somebody, I take them to the ground and I seriously injure them, and like classic judo, right?
Yeah.
And I get into a position for a submission, like an armbar, that I move into a position of control and I submit them, that I'm the one who's in trouble." I said, well, it depends on what they did first. They threw a punch at you,
Yeah.
which is you're in reasonably immediate fear of bodily harm.
Yeah.
Then you escalated that and you moved it to substantial bodily harm or great bodily harm or even death.
Yeah.
If that's what the circumstances were, then probably yes. There's no
Wow.
absolute answer to it.
Wow. I
Probably
never
yes.
thought of it like
And
that.
and then he said, I have been a martial artist at a very high level my entire life.
Yeah.
And nobody has ever told me that before. That is absolutely revelatory for me.
Well, that it would
And
change his entire game plan.
completely,
Yeah.
completely.
Like, I try.
So this is,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So I'm not a big advocate for takedowns. I love
Yeah.
takedowns. I do judo, black belt in jiu-jitsu. I love it. But what I found for a self-defense point of view is we train them in martial arts to learn how to defend against them.
Yeah.
Right. But I have like 5 or 6 solid takedowns that put me into better positions that
Yes.
are going to allow me to exit. So it's great. But with that being said, is I just flashed through all 5 of those takedowns in my head, and 4 of the 5 are lethal force.
Yeah. And so this is why we recommend, for many reasons at IDS, we recommend that we don't use takedowns, but that we use dumps, trips, and sweeps. Now, there are a few that are safer for whoever's attacking you and safer for you, so you end up in a good position, things that you were talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
But primarily speaking, we want to use, from judo, we want to use dump, trips, and sweeps instead of throws, where we remain.
Okay.
we remain standing while they go to the ground.
Okay,
You
yeah.
see?
Okay, so only
So
one of five then. Only one of five. Sweet.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because I agree. Dump strip sweeps, all fantastic. That's basically four of mine. The fifth one is a judo throw, but it's only because I'm using wrestling against wrestling and turning it into a judo throw. Because Ronda Rousey was the best for that. But even that being said, right, it's one of the best. Yeah, because the judo slaying is destroy them with the earth. Right.
Yeah,
And
I hope that you're justified to do that. And I hope
right.
that you're training, if you're highly trained in judo, I hope that your reflexes don't kick in and that
Yeah.
you unconsciously are using their energy to the point where you're using the earth to destroy them because it's not war.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Oh
it's not
man.
war, right?
Love it. Love it. Love it. See, that's why we
That
always have to be a
this
wipe
is
out that
this
heart.
is the this is the cold air above the tip of the iceberg, guys. There's so much more that you need to know. That's why Kevin and I are having these conversations. And that's why self-regulation is so important. Learning it's you versus you when you're training. You're learning to
Yeah.
manage yourself. And that's where your self-efficacy and your feelings of self-worth kick in. If you're going to commit to this as a lifestyle, which really needs to be, you need to commit your life to it. And then now you have a sense of purpose for your life. You have a
Mhm.
reason to get up every morning. You have a something that you're studying and something that you're pursuing that's helpful for yourself and helpful for the world.
Yeah.
Then so that purpose is a fuel that drives everything that you do. For me
Mhm.
personally, like I don't make any decisions that are not consistent with my purpose. Not one.
Beautiful.
Not one. No matter what I'm doing, who I surround myself with, what I'm consuming in my body, what I'm watching, what I'm listening to, everything. This podcast,
Yeah.
I don't do anything that is consistent with my purpose. It drives everything. And when I feel like giving up, and because it gets hard, and I'm tired, or whatever, or the haters, or whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
um, the purpose, the higher purpose and calling is what drives you through life, and it's what gives you that really satisfying sense of fulfillment with everything that you do. You're invincible when you have a sense of purpose.
So true. So true, right? And I think that's where you and I, even though we have different, I don't even want to call it religious, but maybe spiritual. Well, we're very similar spiritually though, which is funny, but we'll just say different religious beliefs. Um, why we get along so well is because we've both been through this journey. We've both
Yeah,
allowed ourselves to say, if I'm going to commit to this, this is full-time commitment, right? Because it's the person that I am now, man, my 20-year-old version of myself would be so proud of who I've become. And that's
yeah.
why I personally don't believe in regret,
That's
because I've
that's
done some shitty things in my life. I will definitely be the first to admit that. But I've never regretted anything because of the
but
person I chose to become today.
but did exactly, did you learn?
Yes. Yeah.
Some of the best people that I know, like I mean it, like we're bad people. Like myself included.
You.
When I like,
Well, good
I'm a
people
born
who
again
did
Christian.
bad things.
Well, that's up for debate. But
Okay.
I'm serious because what I'm about to say, like I'm a born again Christian.
Mhm.
I don't really think there are good people. That's my opinion. That's
Ah,
another conversation. But but in like in terms of like secular terms right now,
yes.
like if I look back at who I was, I'm like, oh, I was if I was observing me as someone who I didn't know and
Yeah.
watching things I was doing, like that's a bad I was a bad person.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I'm not proud of who I was, but I'm glad those things happened because now I can have a reaction and I have something to push against for me to have that transformational period, like a caterpillar in a cocoon, right?
Mhm.
We go through that transformation, and they need that resistance, or a chick coming out of an egg. They need that resistance to push against in order for to come out of the egg, and you can't break the egg for them. They have to be strong enough to pull themselves out of it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
being a bad person at a time, or someone who you regret, who regret maybe isn't the word, but someone who you wish that you hadn't been.
Yeah,
That's the resistance I think that we need in order for us to have transformation who we are now.
for sure. And it comes with forgiving yourself, at least personally, right?
Yeah.
It comes with training martial arts for me. That just humbled me so hard, right? Because being a striker, being tall, being good, I was able to keep people at bay all the time. And then when you start putting yourself into compromised positions where you're not always winning and you get humbled so quick. Wing Chun was the
Yeah.
first that did it to me. And then it was Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Then it was Filipino martial arts, right? Then it was MMA and all these things. And it's like, that's what drove me to become more and to become better. But how much I realized that was mirroring what was happening in my life. And
Yeah.
then how it changed me so dramatically.
Yeah.
In your words, how the butterfly came out of, like, I'm still the same caterpillar, but I've chosen to become better.
Yeah.
Right. And the second I spread my wings
Yes.
is the second I started believing myself. And that's when my family and my close friends started really realizing, like, wow, man, like, good for you. You
Yeah.
messed up, but now you've chosen to become a different person. And
Yeah.
I'm
That's
really
the
proud of
part, the choice. Then no matter how far we down are down whatever road that we're on, we
yeah,
can always choose differently at any moment. And no matter
anyway,
what, you are not your circumstances, right?
yes,
You can choose differently.
yeah,
And every moment that you have, like, it creates this, if you continue to choose it, then it creates this really great constellation for who you are now and who you're becoming. And that path will never end.
yeah, yeah. It's
And
it's so awesome.
that's the great part about this
Yeah,
training, is that you have the opportunity to continuously develop yourself with people who are there, who are also developing themselves, and they're there rooting for you to develop you. And
yeah,
if you're in the right place, there's this really amazing synergy, and you're failing a lot and you're putting yourself in those compromising positions, and you feel grateful that you've had those failures, because failure is a biological and spiritual and psychological requirement in order for growth to happen,
yeah,
competence to occur. You
yeah,
can't grow if you're avoiding failure,
yeah.
you
But a
know?
lot of people love avoidance. But awesome. Let's just recap for the audience real quick, right? The 4 pillars. I always love throwing you on the spot, eh? Hopefully,
That's all right.
right? But so
That's all right.
as succinctly as you can, we'll go
Yeah.
through those 4 just to kind of give them a recap.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, when we're training, I'm always asking these 4 questions.
Beautiful.
So students are always asking themselves these questions at all times. One, were you reasonably in immediate fear of death or great bodily harm? 2, within reason, were you a willing participant in this conflict? 3, did you have a reasonable means of retreat?
Mm,
And 4, was there any reasonable lesser force option that you could have used to stop the threat?
nice, bro.
And
That
we're all we're and we're all 4 of those pillars in place at all times. If there was one of them was missing, guess what? You could be in trouble, right? And so this is why we always have to be, we're in a reactive mode. We have to be observing what's happening and constantly making decisions in a fluid, dynamic, rapidly evolving and changing set of circumstances.
awesome, awesome. Well, brother, that was enlightening for me. As always, we will see you next week, same time, same goat channel. But much appreciated, brother. Make sure to check out Todd's
Thank
stuff.
you. Thank you.
Throw in your stuff real quick there, brother. Your website.
Yeah, thank you. For those, we have an online training program that you can use our stuff and you can train anywhere. IDScitizendefender.com. And then for those of you who have who are interested in becoming affiliates or instructors in our program, this is IDS.com, and or send me a message on our social media, which is Integrative Defense Strategies, pretty much everywhere on social media.
Fantastic. If you guys don't know, I have 2 products available that you guys can train at home. One is on buddhabrothers.com. Just look up the digital seminars, Self-Defense with Kevin Goat. It's going to kind of give you a whole martial arts aspect of a whole bunch of training, which is fantastic. I also created a knife defense training seminar with Guru Dean Franco, available on my website at calgarygongfu.com. If you guys ever have any questions, just hit me up on Instagram. That's where I'm going to answer more of the comments. I give you guys an hour of my time every morning that we post a short. In the long videos, I'm going to try and do a little bit more, especially with these podcasts, of answering your guys' questions in the comments. But that means that you guys got to like and subscribe. And hey, I'm finally getting good at it. Finally getting good.
Yeah.
Right on, brother. Okay, have a great week, brother. We'll take care. We'll
All
see
right,
you
guys.
soon.
Thanks a lot. God bless.